E-commerce websites are often cluttered, displaying too much information to process and too many items to choose from. This leads to information overload and induces choice paralysis. It's therefore essential to offer users an easier way to navigate through large catalogs. This is where faceted navigation, or what Google calls additive filtering, comes into play. Whether your visitors are looking for something very specific or just browsing the website, filters can be highly useful. It will help users locate products without using the internal site search or the primary navigation, which in most cases shows a limited number of options for users. Faceted navigation makes it easier for searchers to find what they are looking for by narrowing product listings based on predefined filters in the form of clickable links. Usability experts refer to faceted navigation as arguably the most significant search innovation of the past decade. Faceted navigation almost always has a positive impact on user experience and business metrics. One retailer saw a 76.1% increase in revenue, a 26% increase in conversions, and 19.76% increase in shopping cart visits in an A/B test after implementing filtering on its listing pages. This screenshot illustrates a usual design for faceted navigation. It's common to present faceted navigation in the left sidebar, but it can also be displayed at the top of product listings, depending on how many filters each category has. In many instances, subcategories are also included in the faceted navigation. Filters, filter values, and facets have different meanings. Filters represent a group of product attributes. In this screenshot, styles, women's size, and women's width are the filters. Filter values are the options under each filter. For the styles filter, the filter values are comfort, pumps, athletic, and so on. Facets are views generated by selecting one or a combination of filter values. Selecting a filter value within the women's size filter and the filter value for the women's width filter creates the so-called facet. Faceted navigation is a boon for users and conversion rates, but it can generate a serious maze for crawlers. The major issues faceted navigation generates are duplicate or near duplicate content, crawling traps, non-essential thin content. If you received a Google Search Console message similar to the one in this screen cap, faceted navigation is one of the possible causes. There's no better example of how filtering can create problems than the one offered by Google. The faceted navigation on googlestore.com, alongside other navigation types such as sorting and viewing options, generated 380,000 URLs. And this was a site that sold just 158 products. If you're curious to find out how many URLs faceted navigation could generate for a particular product listing page, you can use the following formula for counting the possible permutations without allowed repetition. In this formula, n is the total number of filter values that can be applied, and r is the total number of filters. For instance, let's say you have two filters: the styles filter with 5 filtering options and the materials filter with 9 filtering options. In this case, n will be 14, which is the total number of filtering options, and r will be 2 because we have 2 filters. This setup could theoretically generate 91 URLs. If you add another filter, for example the color filter, and this filter has 15 filtering options, n becomes 29 and r equals 3. This setup will generate more than 3,600 unique URLs. As I mentioned, this formula does not allow repetitive URLs. This means that if users select style equals comfort and material equals suede, they get the same results as for selecting material equals suede and style equals comfort at the same URL. If you don't enforce this order for URL parameters, then the faceted navigation will generate 182 URLs for the example with 2 filters and almost 22,000 URLs for the example where 3 filters have been applied. In the screenshot at the top, the huge difference between the total number of pages indexed and the number of pages ever crawled hints at a possible crawling issue or some serious content quality issue. In this particular case, the issue was identified and confirmed by checking the URL parameters report in Google Search Console. The large number of URLs was due to the price filter, which generated 5.2 million URLs. You can partially solve duplicate content issues generated by faceted navigation by forcing a strict order for URL parameters, regardless of the order in which filters have been selected. For example, category could be the first selected filter and price the second. If a visitor or a crawler chooses the price filter first and then category, you make it so that the category shows up first in the URL, followed by price. In this URL structure example, although the cherry filter value was selected after the double door filter value, its position in the URL is based on a predefined order. The same order is reflected in the breadcrumbs as well. If you need a breadcrumb that reflects the order of user selection, you can store the order in a session cookie rather than in a URL. Another near-duplicate content issue generated by facets arises when one of the filtering options presents almost the same items as the unfiltered view. For example, the unfiltered view for ski and snowboard racks has a total of 15 products, and you can narrow the results using 2 subcategories, hitch mount and rooftops. However, the subcategory rooftop ski racks and snowboard racks includes 13 results from the unfiltered page. This means that except for 2 products, these filtered and unfiltered pages are near duplicates. Faceted navigation comes with a significant advantage over hierarchical navigation. The filter combinations will generate pages that could not exist in a tree-like hierarchy because tree-like hierarchies are rigid and can't cover all possible combinations generated by faceted navigation. The hierarchy structure is still good for high-level decisions though. Let's say you sell jewelry and would like to rank for the query square platinum pendants. Your website hierarchy only segregates into jewelry type categories such as pendants, bracelets, and so on, and then it allows filtering based on a material filter with values such as platinum, gold, and so on. If there is no shape filter to list the square option, your website will have no faceted navigation page for square platinum pendants. However, if you were to introduce the shape filter on the platinum pendants listing page, it will allow you to generate the square platinum pendants facet, which narrows down the inventory based on the square filter value. This page is relevant to users and to search engines. You can further optimize this page with custom content and visuals to make it even more appealing to machines and humans. If there's no shape filter to generate the square platinum pendants facet, and if there's no hierarchical navigation that could lead to such a page, you will have to manually create a page that targets the square platinum pendants query. Then you will have to link to it internally and externally so search engines can discover it. It's practically impossible to create hundreds or thousands or even millions of such pages manually. Before discussing how to approach faceted navigation from an SEO perspective, it's important to break down the filters and facets into 3 types: essential, important, and overhead. Essential filters will generate landing pages that target competitive keywords with high search volumes, which usually are head or torso terms. If your faceted navigation lists subcategories, those facets are essential and they are called faceted subcategories. In this example, bags, wallets, and the remaining subcategories are essential filters. you should allow search engines to crawl and index such filters. Essential facets could also be generated by a combination of filter values under brand and category. For example, using the filter value Nokia for brand and the filter value cameras for category. In essence, either category or brand can be considered a facet, as they function like filters for larger sets of data. You can handpick the top combinations of essential filters that are valuable for your users and your business and turn those into standalone landing pages by adding content and by optimizing them as you would with a regular important page. This is mostly a manual process as it requires content creation, so it's doable only for a limited number of pages at once. However, if you do this on a regular basis and you commit resources for content creation, it will give you an advantage over your competitors. Start with the most important 1% of facets and gradually move on. If you do a couple per day and you only need about 100 to 150 carefully crafted words, in a year you will have optimized hundreds of filtered pages. All essential facet pages should have unique titles and descriptions. Ideally, the titles should be custom, while the descriptions can be boilerplate. Make sure that search engines can find the links pointing to essential filters and facets. As a matter of fact, essential filters should be linked from your content-rich pages, such as blog posts and user guides. For maximum link juice flow, link from the main content area of such pages. The URL structure for essential facets should be clean. It should ideally reflect, either partially or exactly, the hierarchy of the website in a directory structure or a file naming convention. In this example, you can see how the URL for the bathroom accessories subcategory facet is parameter-free and reflects the website's hierarchy. Important filters or facets. These refinements will lead users and search engines to landing pages that can drive traffic for torso and long-tail keywords. For instance, if your analytics data proves that your target market searches for, let's say, red comfort shoes, this means that URLs generated by color plus style selections are important facets. Search engines should be able to access important facet URLs. You will have to decide what is and what is not an important facet, preferably on a category or subcategory basis. For instance, the color filter can be relevant and important for the shoes subcategory, but it will be an overhead filter for the fragrances subcategory. A particular case you need to pay attention to is the sales or clearance filter. In this example, the retailer lists all the facets for all the products on clearance. The left navigation filters in this image don't help much because rugs don't have sleeves, snowshoes don't have a shirt style, and pullovers don't have a ski pole style. Instead of listing products, this retailer should list only subcategories in the left navigation and the main content area. This will make it more likely that users will handle the ambiguous nature of the clearance page by first choosing a category that interests them. Once the desired category has been selected, then the retailer should display the filters that apply to that category. Depending on how your target market searches online, it's advisable to prevent search engines from accessing URLs generated when more than 2 filter values have been applied. In case one of the applied filters is an essential filter, you will block when 3 filters have been applied. This works best with multiple selections on the same filter because users are less likely to search for patterns like brand 1, brand 2, and category. Being able to select multiple filter values is useful for users who might select red and blue shirts, but they are not so useful for search engines. Therefore, such selections can be blocked for bots. In this screenshot, you can see an example of multi-selections on the brand filter. Note that blocking access to faceted navigation URLs by default whenever multiple filters are applied, will prevent bots from discovering pages created by single value selections on different filters. For example, color equals red and style equals comfort. You will miss traffic for a large number of filter combinations unless you manually create and optimize landing pages for all the important filters and facets, and unless you allow the bots to crawl and index them. Let your data be the source of truth when deciding which facets you need to leave open for search engines. Gather data from various sources, then programmatically replace keywords with their filter values when appropriate. This is very similar to the labeling and categorization technique I described in the website architecture section of the course. You need to identify patterns and see which filters or facets are used the most by your visitors. In your e-commerce platform, mark the important filters and let them be indexed. The URL structure for important facets has to be as clean as possible. It's okay to keep the important filter values in a directory or in the file path structure. It's also okay to keep them in URL parameters as long as you use no more than 2 or 3 parameters. In this screenshot, you can see that when an important filter is applied, its value is appended to the URL in the form of a directory. In this URL, the filter value is color under the brand filter. Whenever possible, avoid using non-standard URL encoding for URL parameters. Often, search engines treat pages created by filters like subsets of the unfiltered page. To avoid being pushed into the supplemental index, you need to create unique titles, descriptions, breadcrumbs, headings, and eventually custom content on these filtered pages. Boilerplate titles and descriptions may be fine, but don't just repeat the title of the unfiltered view on facets pages. The unfiltered view will be the view all page or the index page in case you implemented pagination with rel previous and rel next. Additionally, the breadcrumbs have to update to reflect the user selection. So do the headings. This may sound obvious, but it's amazing how many e-commerce websites don't do it. One technique that can be useful to increase the relevance of each filtered page and to decrease near-duplicate content problems is to write product descriptions that include the filter values used to generate the page. For instance, let's say you sell diamonds. When a user selects a value under the material filter, the product description snippet would include the value of the filter. In this example, you're looking at a product listing page that filters the SKUs by material equals white gold. The quick view product description for the second item cleverly includes the words white and gold. This quick view snippet is different from the product description on the product detail page. Section 1 in this screenshot shows the quick view product description snippet on the product listing page. As you can see, the snippet was carefully created to include all the important filter values. Section 2 depicts the product description as found on the product detail page. These two product descriptions are different. Writing custom product snippets for listing pages is a very effective SEO tactic even when you feature only 20 to 25 words for each product. However, it's difficult to write such snippets when you have thousands of products. A workaround is to write the product detail descriptions to include the most important product filter values either at the beginning or the end of the product detail description, and then automatically extract and display the first or the last sentence on the product listing page. Another method used to increase the relevance of the listing pages generated by important facets is to add the selected filter values to the product listing on the fly. However, this can easily transform into spam if you're not careful. Make sure that you have rules in place to avoid keyword stuffing. Overhead filters. These filters generate pages that have minimal or no search volume. All they do is waste crawl budget on irrelevant URLs. A classic example of an overhead filter is price. In many instances, so is size. However, keep in mind that a filter can be overhead for a business, but it can be important or even essential for another business. You should prevent search engines from crawling URLs generated based on overhead filters, and you should mark filters as overheads on a category basis. Add a noIndexFollow meta tag to the generated page, and append the crawler equals no parameter to its URL whenever a combination of filters includes an overhead value. Then block the crawler parameter with robots.txt. The directive in robots.txt will prevent wasting crawl budget, while the noIndex meta tag will prevent empty snippets from showing up in the SERPs. If you have pages in the index that you need to remove, first implement the noIndexFollow and wait for the pages to be taken out of the index. Once they are removed, append the crawler control parameter to the URLs. Be careful about the combination of robots.txt and noIndex meta tag, as robots.txt will not allow robots access to a page-level directive, and noIndex is a page-level directive. If your website doesn't have an index bloat issue or crawling issues, you may consider implementing rel canonical instead of robots.txt. You can also use Ajax to generate the content for overhead facets in a way that the URLs will not change, so search engine crawlers will not request unnecessary content. In this case, you need to block the scripts and all other resources needed for the Ajax calls with robots.txt. This will prevent search engines from rendering the Ajax links. If you want to degrade the code for users with JavaScript off, you can use URL parameters, which can be placed either after a hash mark or in a URL string that is blocked with robots.txt. However, the most stringent crawling restrictions come from not making the overhead URLs available to bots. Notice how this URL contains the NCNI-5 string at the end. The string was added to control crawlers because all URLs containing the NCNI-5 string are blocked with robots.txt. To summarize, this is how Home Depot defines the filtered URLs for all three types of facets. The URL for the essential facet is made of a clean category name. The important facet URL includes the category name and the filter value color. The overhead URL, while it includes the category name and the filter values, it also includes the crawl control string NCNI-5. It's a bad idea to rewrite URLs to make overhead filters look like static URLs. This sample URL includes the price overhead filter with the values 50 to 100. The URL doesn't exist on Home Depot's website. I added the highlighted part just to exemplify. Generating search engine-friendly URLs doesn't change the fact that there will be millions of irrelevant pages on your website. Regarding URL discoverability, search engines don't need to find the links pointing to overhead filters or facets. In fact, you have to prevent search engines from discovering overhead facets. If you have to allow search engines to crawl overhead facets, keep the filters in parameters using standard HTML encoding and key equal value pairs instead of directories. This helps search engines differentiate between useful and useless values. Let's take a look at the faceted navigation case study. I searched on Google for Canon digital cameras, and Overstock showed up on the first page, Office Max on the 5th, and Target on the 7th. Let's look at Overstock's approach to filtered navigation. The subcategory page Digital Cameras, filtered by brand equals Canon, has a unique title, customized breadcrumbs, and a relevant H1 heading. Also, this page uses a good meta description. These elements send quality signals to search engines. When users filter the SKUs by another brand, for example Sony, the page elements update. If they didn't, the Canon digital cameras page would have the same title, the same H1 description and breadcrumbs as the digital cameras page, which is not desirable. Additionally, overstock allows the crawl of essential and important filters, and it doesn't create links for gray-end filters, which are filters that generate 0 results. In this screenshot, you can see that the 10 megapixels filter value generates 0 results. Therefore, it's not hyperlinked. Overstock's implementation of faceted navigation is SEO friendly, as it allows crawlers to access various filtered pages, and it updates page elements based on user or crawler selection. A note on gray-end filter values. Whatever you choose to do with these filter values in the interface, for example, not showing them at all, or showing them at the bottom of the filters list, or hiding them behind a show more link, gray-end filters should not be hyperlinked. If you have to hyperlink them for some reason, the header response code for 0 results pages should be 404. Alternatively, you can use robots.txt to block URLs generating 0 results. Let's take a look at Office Max's approach to filtered navigation. In this screenshot, we are on the digital cameras sub-sub. The title, the description, and the breadcrumbs don't update when the user selects a filter value under the brand filter. This means that thousands of filtered pages will have very similar on-page SEO elements to the unfiltered page. Although the products on each filtered page will change, search engines will get a lot of near-duplicate meta tag signals. This tallness might be the cause for Google not to index the faceted page resulting from filtering by Canon. The page that ranks for Canon digital cameras on Office Max is the digital cameras category page. This is not the ideal page to rank with because it doesn't clearly match the user intent. Filtering by brand means that users have to take an additional unnecessary step. On the cached version of the digital cameras page, we notice that the faceted navigation is nowhere to be found because the faceted navigation is not accessible to search engines. A quick reminder here. If the links are missing in the cached version, Google might still be able to find them when they render the page like a browser would. Maybe Office Max tried to fix some over-indexation issues or a possible panda filter on thin content pages, but this faceted navigation implementation is not optimal as it completely blocks access to all filtered pages. Unless Office Max creates manual landing pages for all essential and important filtered pages, they have closed the doors to search engines and to the traffic those pages could bring in. And here's Target's approach to faceted navigation. Similarly to Office Max, Target doesn't create relevance signals for filtered pages. On Target's website, the page title, breadcrumb, heading, and description on the Canon digital cameras page are the same as on the unfiltered page digital cameras, and they will be the same on hundreds or thousands of other possible filtered pages. Moreover, since the page has a canonical pointing to the unfiltered page, its ability to rank is theoretically 0. Because of their approach, I thought they would have a Canon digital cameras page that can be reached from the navigation or other pages. If they had one, Google was not able to identify it. I tried to find the most relevant page on their website using the site operator, but Google couldn't find a category page or even a facet URL relevant to Canon digital cameras. All the most relevant results were PDPs. Google's cached version of the page shows that the faceted navigation doesn't create links. Because brand is an important filter, and because in our example we used only one filter value, all the brand filter values should be plain HTML links. Let's talk about categories in faceted navigation. Hierarchical, category-based navigation is useful as long as it's easy for users to choose between categories. For instance, it could be more helpful for users if easy to decide upon subcategories are listed in the main content area, as opposed to being displayed as facet subcategories in the sidebar. subcategory listing pages should be used whenever further navigation or scope definition is needed before it makes sense to display a list of products to users. Generally, subcategory pages make the most sense in the one or two top layers of the hierarchy, where the scope is often too broad to produce a meaningful product list. In this screenshot, you can see how the subcategories are listed in the main content area. Faceted navigation, which is usually present in the left navigation as filtering options, is not yet introduced at this level of the hierarchy, which is the category level, and not even on the sub-subcategory level. In this example, you can see how the category-based navigation ends at the third level of the hierarchy. The first level is the decor category, the second level is blinds and window treatments, and the third level is blinds and shades. The faceted navigation is displayed only on the third level of the hierarchy. In this example, you can see the faceted navigation displayed in the left sidebar to help with decision making. You can also notice that the subcategory listing has been replaced with the product listing. It's important to keep hierarchies relatively shallow so users don't have to click through more than 4 layers to get to the list of products. Search engines will have the same challenges and may deem products buried deep in the hierarchy as not important. Because faceted navigation is a granular inventory segmentation feature, it generates excess content in most implementations. It will also generate duplicate content, for instance, if you don't enforce a strict order for parameter filters in URLs. So, what options do we have for controlling faceted navigation? One option is the rel canonical. Although rel canonical is supposed to be used for identical or near identical content, it may be worth experimenting with it to optimize facet URLs. Vanessa Fox, who worked for Google Webmaster Central, has suggested the following approach for some cases. If the filtered view is a subset of a single non-filtered page, you can use the canonical attribute to point the filtered page to the non-filtered one. However, if the filtered view results in a paginated content, this may not be viable, as each page may not be a subset of what you would like to point to as canonical. Rel canonical will consolidate indexing signals to the canonical page and will address some of the duplicate content issues, but search engine crawlers may still get trapped into crawling irrelevant URLs. Rel canonical is a good option for new websites or for adding new filtering options to existing websites. However, it's not helpful if you're trying to remove existing filtered URLs from search engine indices. If you don't have indexing and crawling issues, you can use rel canonical as Vanessa suggests. Another option for optimizing faceted navigation is robots.txt. Robots.txt is the crawl control sledgehammer. Keep in mind that if you use robots.txt to block URLs, you will tamper with the flow of PageRank to and from thousands of pages. That's because while URLs listed in robots.txt can get PageRank, they do not pass PageRank. Also, keep in mind that robots.txt does not prevent pages from being indexed. However, in some cases, this approach is necessary. For example, when you have a new website with no authority and a very large number of items that need to be discovered, or when you have thin content or indexing issues. If you use parameters in URLs and would like to prevent the crawling of all the URLs generated by selecting values under the price filter, you would add something like this in the robots.txt file. This directive means that any URL containing price equals will not be crawled. Another controlling option is the URL parameter or directory path. This method requires you to selectively add a URL parameter to control which filtered pages are crawlable and which are not. I have described this in the crawl optimization section, but I will repeat it in here as well. First, decide which URLs you want to block. Let's say you want to control the crawl of the faceted navigation, by not allowing search engines to crawl URLs generated when applying more than one filter value within the same filter. In this case, you will add the crawler equals no parameter to all URLs generated when a second filter value is added on the same filter. More than two filter values from different filters. In this case, you will add the crawler equals no parameter to all URLs generated when a third filter value is added, no matter which options were selected, nor the order they were selected. Here's a scenario for the second option. The crawler is on the battery chargers subcategory page. The hierarchy is Home, Accessories, Battery Chargers. The page URL is mysite.com/accessories/motorcycle battery chargers. Then the crawler checks one of the brand's filter values, NOCO. This is the first filter value, and therefore you will let the crawler fetch that page. The URL for this selection doesn't contain the exclusion parameter. The URL looks like mysite.com/accessories/motorcycle battery chargers (brand equals NOCO). The crawler now checks one of the style filter values, cables. Since this is the second filter value applied, you will still let the crawler access the URL. So the URL still doesn't contain the exclusion parameter. It contains just the brand and style parameters. The URL looks like mysite.com/accessories/motorcycle battery chargers (brand equals NOCO and style equals cables). Now the crawler selects one of the pricing filter values, number 1. Since this is the third filter value, you will append the crawler equals no to the URL. So now the URL becomes mysite.com/accessories/motorcycle battery chargers (brand equals NOCO and style equals cables and pricing equals 1 and crawler equals no. To block this URL, the robots.txt will contain the following lines. This method prevents the crawling of facet URLs when more than two filter values have been applied, but it doesn't allow specific control over which filters are going to be crawled and which ones not. For example, if the crawler checks the pricing options first, the link containing the pricing parameter will be crawled. Note that blocking filtered pages based solely on how many filter values have been applied poses some risks. For instance, if a price filter value is applied first, the generated page will still be indexed since only one filter value has been selected. You should have more solid crawl control rules. For example, if an overhead filter value has been applied, always block the generated pages. It's also a good idea to limit the number of selections a search engine robot can discover, and we will discuss this in a couple of minutes as the JavaScript or Ajax crawl control option. Important filters or facets have to be plain HTML links. You can present overhead filters as plain text to search engines, but as functional HTML to users. The block directory approach requires putting the unwanted URLs under a directory, then blocking that directory in robots.txt. In our previous example, when the crawler checks one of the pricing options, place the filtering URL under the filtered directory. If your regular URL looks like this, when you control crawlers, the URL will include the filtered directory. If you want to block the URL, the robots.txt will contain the following. Let's talk about the nofollow option for controlling crawlers. Some websites prefer to nofollow unnecessary filters or facets. Surprisingly, and in contradiction with the other official recommendation that tells us not to nofollow any internal links, nofollow is one of Google's recommendations for handling faceted navigation. However, nofollow doesn't guarantee that search engines will not crawl the unnecessary URLs or that those pages will not be indexed. Additionally, nofollowing internal links might send search engines the wrong signals because nofollow translates into "don't trust these links." Hence, nofollow doesn't solve current indexing issues. This option works best with new websites. It may be a good idea to either back up the nofollow option with another method that prevents URLs from being indexed, or to canonicalize the link to a superset. Now, let's see how you can use JavaScript or Ajax to control bots. We established that essential and important facets and filters should always be accessible to search engines as links. Preferably, those will be plain HTML links. URLs for overhead filters and facets, on the other hand, can safely be blocked for search engine bots. Theoretically, you can obfuscate the entire faceted navigation from search engines by loading it with search engine unfriendly JavaScript or Ajax. We've seen this deployed at Office Max. However, excluding the entire faceted navigation is usually a bad idea, and it should only be done if there are alternative paths for search engines to reach pages created for all essential and important facets. In practice, this is neither feasible nor recommended. One option is to allow search engines access only to essential and important facet links, while not generating overhead links. For example, you load only the important facets and filters as plain HTML, while the overhead filters or facets are loaded with JavaScript or Ajax. Users will be able to click on any of the links, as they will be generated in the browser. In this example, users are shown just two filter values for review rating with a link to Show All Review Rating. When they click on that link, they see all the filter values. However, the Show All Review Rating is not a link for search engines. This will effectively limit the number of URLs search engines can discover, which may be good or bad depending on your situation. If your target market searches for laminate flooring 3-star reviews, then you need to make the corresponding link available to bots. Similarly, you can obfuscate entire filters or just some filter values. For example, eBay initially presents users with only a limited number of filters and filter values, but then at click on See All or More Refinements links, it opens all the filters in a modal window. This modal window contains all the links required by users to refine the list of products. However, the content of the modal window is not accessible to search engines, as you can see in this screenshot, where the More Refinements is not hyperlinked. One advantage of selectively loading filters and facets with roboted Ajax or JavaScript is that it may help pass more PageRank to other, more important pages. This is very similar to the old PageRank sculpting concept. However, remember that this sculpting happens only if search engines are not able to execute Ajax on such pages. And search engines are getting better by the day at executing JavaScript and Ajax. To make sure the links are not accessible to Googlebot, block the resources necessary for the JavaScript or Ajax calls with robots.txt, and then do a fetch and render in Google Search Console. If you know that some pages are not valuable for search engines, and if you don't want those useless pages in the index, then why allowing bot access to them in the first place? Another advantage of selectively loading URLs is that it will prevent unnecessary links from being crawled. One other option for controlling faceted navigation is the use of hash marks. You can append parameters after a hash mark to avoid the indexing of faceted URLs. This means that you can let faceted navigation create URLs for every possible combination of filters. As a note, remember that Ajax content is signaled with hashbang, however, this scheme is no longer recommended by Google. If you do an info search for a page that includes the hash mark in the URL, you will see that Google defaults the page to the URL that excludes everything after the hash mark. For search engines, this page defaults to the content on this page. The hash mark can potentially consolidate linking signals to modcloth.com/shop/books, but all the pages generated using the hash mark will not be indexed. Therefore, they can't rank. However, you can place just the overhead filters after the hash mark. Whenever an essential or important facet is selected, include it in a clean URL before the hash mark. Multiple selection filters can also be added after the hash mark. You can also control crawlers using the URL parameters handling tools offered by Bing and Google. This setup hints to Google that the MID parameter is used for narrowing the content. I prefer to tell Google about the effect that each parameter has on page content, but in the end, I will let them decide which URLs to crawl. This setup presents only a clue to Google, so you still need to address crawling and duplicate content using another method or a combination of methods. Adding the noIndexFollow meta tag to pages generated by overhead filters can help address index bloat issues, but it will not prevent spiders from getting caught in filtering traps. A quick note about using the noIndex directive at the same time with using robots.txt. Theoretically, noIndexFollow can be used in conjunction with robots.txt to prevent the crawling and indexing of new websites. However, if unwanted URLs have been already crawled and indexed, you have to first add noIndexFollow to those pages and let search engine robots crawl them. This means you will not block the URLs with robots.txt yet. Block the unwanted URLs with robots.txt only after the URLs have been removed from the index.